My name is Rhonda Vanvleet, and I'm originally from the Rensselaer area and moved to Kentland, Indiana. My husband, Tom Vanvleet, which is over here, which I also want to thank him for his part of the presentation of putting my words on the film. Tonight I'll be sharing my knowledge and my experience of hunting for the Indian artifacts with my father, and my father's name is Harold Fuzz Coley, which he passed away a couple years ago, and this is a small part of my inheritance of his artifacts. So I felt like this is a great opportunity for people that maybe have found some on their parents' property or have shared the experience of hunting for them. People younger than me probably have no clue that they're out there. But my father's collection, which he was 89 when he passed away, is just that. It's his collection. He found everything and never bought anything, and he was known for a big variety of exceptional points for one person to find. Most people that have a really nice, elaborate collection, they've bought in pieces to make it a finer collection. So that's one thing about my father on that. So the reasons why people don't actively look for Indian artifacts today is that there's no prior knowledge of the Indian history that they are aware of. You have a lot of trespassing laws, so you can't just go out onto somebody's property. And a lot of residential and business development has taken over a lot more territory where there have been things. I found a banner stone, and now it's a blacktop of a church parking lot. So I won't ever be able to go back out there and search for the other half. So another reason that's no longer ideal land surfaces because farmers don't plow, and what the plowing did was dug deep and then rolled it over to uncover, and then your weather would uncover different things. There's no till, so again, they're not working the ground, they just go in and plant, and so it's not uncovering anything. They're not removing the wooded areas, and the wooded areas are the higher points usually and where the Indians may have been. So you're not, finding things there. And then we also have the government programs where a lot of our non-farming ground is turned into that. So then that's not worked at all. That's kind of one of their rules when you turn it into some of those government plots. The last one is like our Kankakee Sands. That was probably an awesome area for Indians to be roaming through there. A lot of wooded areas prior when Carlock they owned that, and then the Prudential owned it after that. But so now it's back to just growing, covering that up again. So my knowledge on this is I refer to it as walking and gawking the hills as a young child with my father, and we walked Newton County, Jasper County, White County, some of Pulaski, but not much. But and so I also think of it as a back in the day hobby, because it's not, people just don't do it as much. But I'm learning tonight that we still have archaeologists or gentlemen that are interested in searching for things. So how many of you tonight have experienced finding, inheriting, or hearing stories of relatives finding the Indian artifacts? And what I would like for everybody that's brought things in to acknowledge themselves and either, like one thing about them, and then afterwards, if you say what area you're in, then we can all kind of walk around and talk more, and maybe learn more about that. Just a brief acknowledgement of your name and where your things are.
I am from north of the Green Acre Farm in Newton County. That would be 4 townships, Lincoln Lake, Colfax, and McClellan.
Okay.
And we're right there in the corner. This is the old Beaver Lake. I don't know, you probably can't see it, but anyway, that's where I found all of mine. That I've got the collection here. And I've been doing it for 69 years.
Okay. Thank you, Shirley. Kenny, you want to say anything?
I didn't bring them in. I got them outside. No.
Okay, I mean your name. Okay. Kenny, last name?
Spiker.
Spiker has a knowledge on Indian artifacts also, and
Brian Wagner is my name. So I spent a lot of time on my great-grandfather's farm. I think it's over on 50 South, opposite of 41 from the drag strip. And then, you know, so I'm a third-generation collector. My grandpa, my dad, myself. I kind of took it to a whole nother level and grew the collection more. I haven't found very many myself because, like you said, they're harder to find now. But yeah,
okay.
I mean, I guess that's.
Thank you.
I live in Crown Point now.
Okay.
I'll say something. I've been collecting artifacts for 60 years. And I grew up in Earl Park, on a farm out there. Hunted mostly down there. I moved to Kentland in the early 70s, working for Supercross Seeds. And I started hunting in Newton County, so I have, I don't know, 10, 12,000 pieces. I don't know how many, but from Newton and Benton County. Next year, if anybody's interested, next year Earl Park is going to have a summer festival in June, and I'm going to take my entire collection out, have it all out. It'll be the first time ever. Be a lot of stuff I've never seen. I have, but I've never seen it all at one time. I'm going to have it out in June next year. If somebody wants to come and see it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? I can hold it.
I'm John Kessler, and I have my brother-in-law's collection. His name's Mike Machinique. Would you hold that axe up, Tom? It's right there in the corner. It's a multicolored axe that you don't see too many like that. And I also have a banner stone, and I'm curious as to what a banner stone's used for.
Okay.
I'm asking, yes.
Well, we'll get to that. I can tell you what I've learned, but I'm sure there could be other possibilities. Anybody else?
That guy at the end of the table.
Alan.
Alan Buswell. I have mostly collected by my grandfather on our farm in Washington Township along the Iroquois River, a couple miles west of the fairgrounds.
Awesome. Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay.
I'm Russ Collins. I really never collected a lot. My cousin Gene James did, but lived out northwest of Kentland, and there was a ridge out east of where I lived, and I think they camped on that because the river came up and then flattened out, and Gene found a lot of arrowheads over there. You know, once in a while when I was cultivating, I'd look down and maybe find one, but I never really looked for them. But I've seen.
Great.
I got a few. I mean, a collection.
Anybody else? Okay. And this was the crowd that I thought would be interested because a lot of us have done that, found it on our parents' ground and things. People younger than me probably have no clue. The archaeologists have divided it into 4 different periods of time to age the different things as to when those points were found. So the first one is Paleodonin, but they always refer to it as Paleo, and that's all 10,000 to 8,000 BC. Sometimes the dates vary, but not, you know, because every time I look in a different book, they've got different, but to me that's a long time ago. So, and then you got the Archaic period, 8,000 to 1,500 BC, your Woodland period, 1,500 to 1,000 AD. So these are getting closer, the newer points. And then Mississippian, 1,000 to the 1,700 period. They were documenting things then after that period because that's when the settlers started coming in. So about the first one, the Paleo period, this marks the first people in Indiana, your nomadic hunters, gatherers who hunted in groups, and they maybe used more of the the spear type. So they followed a large animal, one animal at a time, and then hunted with the spears. So they were slow moving, and perhaps it was a mastodon or, you know, the bigger, slower animals. And of course, this is back like Ice Age period type thing that we're talking about there. The Archaic period, it's a long period of adaptation to the post-Ice Age environment. They developed the lighter weight spears which were needed for the smaller, faster animals because they no longer had the big animals. And if I pronounce this right, the Adelaide device is something what this is showing. It helped to lengthen the throw to give it a faster speed and, you know, like the quickness, because the animals were smaller and traveled at a faster speed. So this it's like two pieces, and then it hooks into the spear itself, and there are some different things that they say some of the banner stones were used as counterweights. So as they throw and they stretch their arm, it fires it, you know, faster. And here is, well, I don't know if you can see, but the ones, they're usually like with the slate that have a hole through both sides, and that's more of the, they're not sure what the banner stone use exactly was. Like, if it was used for ceremonial on certain spears for the chief, you know, for their tribe, or for the weight. So you read a lot about that as a conflict of what it was actually used for. And when we find these things, you don't actually find everything that tells the whole story of what it's used for, just, you know, the thinking part of it. So that's kind of what they go by, unless they find them in, uncover them in like the burial things or something. The Archaic period and the ones further on now are divided into three parts: the early, middle, and the late periods, and they progress as it gets further on into that time period. So the people then are beginning to search for a wider range of resources, including plants, fruits, nuts, and roots. And so they're also starting towards the late Archaic period establishing seasonal villages and starting to make storage baskets and developing new tools. So as time progresses, they're learning and designing new things. So that's also helps them, the archaeologists, to figure out what time period certain points go in. The next one is the woodland period. So there's also an early middle and a late woodland period where they definitely have significant changes in this. They walked everywhere, they made trips, they started to make trips down the rivers and dug out canoes, or I've even read where it's like a circular floating thing. But they're just now starting to do the traveling. The early and the middle, they started developing pottery, and I have a display of pottery rims, and to my knowledge there's a lot of different designs on them. If that distinguished between tribes or potter, I don't know on that, because I've not read up on that, but this is a lot of different designs, and they would use either bone or whatever to make those designs on there. The arrowheads and the bow comes into place in the woodland period, in the late part of it, and so you start seeing thinner triangular points, arrowheads, and they're sharp. So they start developing that and hunting with more bow and arrow, but it also is getting closer to the time period where they are fighting with them too. They're using the bow and arrow as a weapon. The Mississippian is pretty much the last of the four, and this one is associated with complex societies, so larger settlements of the Indians, and they're starting to do extensive trade. And the trading involves possibly the stone, different unique, points that they might share. There's also a large number that are placed in strategic places, like the junction of two rivers, along the shore of a big lake, or the sandier knobs of the Kankakee Marsh, because if everybody's not aware, our northern part was all marsh area. So it was an ideal spot for the Indians up there. Fancier objects are now being used. Travel and trade taking place in a lot of religious rituals due to their burials and things like that, where the chiefs may be buried with what they call, I believe, a cache. It's a lot of different things that they felt for them to be, as they moved on into their next journey of life, that they take those items with them. So that's why they were buried with them. Okay, then our white settler movement comes in, and this is in the 17 to 1800s. And so this is when they start recording and finding, the artifacts. And so also the treaty area and ongoing history, and that's where it all starts on starting to date things and that. So that's where the beginning of the history of identifying objects. The key tribes included in Indiana, you'll see different maps, different places, but in Indiana you have, and these are just a few, you have Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Kickapoo, Shawnee, and all of these were considered part of the Algonquin group. And does anybody know what Indian tribes were in our northwestern part of Indiana? Anybody have an idea? Potawatomi was north of us. In our area here, we had Miami, and further south, like Lafayette, I believe it was like the WEA, W-E-A groups. But you look at other maps and they have other names of this area. But I believe, if I'm right, gentlemen, it's mainly Miami through this area right here. A lot of people will guess Iroquois Indians, and they were up in New York, just because we got the Iroquois River. Okay, so why do you find artifacts in this area? And we talked about the marshes, and there's mucklands over in Jasper County. Newton County might have a few of the mucklands. They provided what they needed to live by, the game, the fish, the fowl, the fur. It's a big glacial area through here, where they found their stone material for their weapons and their tools. A lot of sandy knobs near waterways. We've got a lot of waterways through here. And that's where you would find them, because they wore moccasins and they didn't want their feet wet. So they, traveled on the dry areas for their campsite. And again, the waterways, Iroquois, Kankakee River, provided a lot of their highways and traveling. I don't know how many of you know, but we have Indian trail markers. And in Jasper County, where the Trail Tree Restaurant is, that's why they named that, because there are trail trees there. And the Indians would, on a smaller tree, would tie it down, and then it would grow. And it usually pointed to a certain direction, and it was almost like just a flat piece. I'm not sure if I have a picture of it later in here or not, but and then today I just saw that in Monticello there's a place over there that has some trail trees, so that marked their trail. So a lot of Indians, when they were traveling, that was a point that told them, keep going in whatever direction. Another why you find them here, of course, you got the ceremonial beliefs so they buried their chiefs with the fine belongings to continue on with their afterlife. The white settler movement, they started pushing them from Ohio, the Indians, to our area, and Wisconsin area, the French and all that started pushing them down into the marsh area. The Indians were happy about being in the marshlands. They weren't happy that they had to move, but they were content there. because they had everything that they needed, and the settlers kind of left them alone because they didn't have an interest in the wet, swamp, until the government decides they want to develop it and sell that ground in order to pay for the draining of that, and that's how the Kankakee Marsh then was drained. And so then when they start draining it, then they're uncovering more things too. What are they made out of? Of course, we talked about the glaciers, providing the stones, and their tools and weapons were made out of what's flint. And flint, there's a sample of it here, is usually smooth and different colors, and it flakes pretty easily. You've got granite, which is harder. Quartz, obsidian, I believe, is the black. It looks like glass. Jasper and slate. Slate is an example of what your banner stones were made out of, that the holes are drilled through, and among other points. We also are fortunate that by what the stones are made out of kind of distinguishes what area they came from. I have a tray here of what's called Indiana greenstone, that there's a quarry down, I believe, in Benton County, Attica area, and so that's why we find a lot of them. And when they're wet, you definitely see the greenish blue color through them, but I've also done some reading where you don't find a lot of big ones. It can be yay or nay, but the reading that I did said that particular stone is hard to work with, so you don't find a lot of big points out of that. But it definitely shows that this is the area that you find a lot of those. Like, you wouldn't go to Ohio and find that unless an Indian had traded it, because sometimes they do that but the movement was moving west. Where to look for them? So we always start by what's one thing we have to live: water source. So if I was to explain how you could go about finding them, I would look for a high raised area in a field near a water source. So it could be a river, a ditch, like a pond area, because that would have been deeper years ago when there was more. The sand knobs, why you find them there is that's what the wind hits first, and it uncovers them. And if you've ever been out on a hill looking for them, and I have, where your footsteps are blown shut quicker than, as you take the next step. And so you're constantly covering your eyes, to look, but it's uncovering it fast. And it gets exciting when you're doing that, because it's uncovering a lot of different stones. People search the runoff areas on fields into the ditches, and that can be done like where there's erosion, like you've got, like, say, a hill that kind of comes down like this and another one here, where your water has to flow, and it usually flows a certain way into the ditch. So you might find them laying there where they're just sticking out there because the water's washed all the dirt off of them. Or you might find them at the base, right at the base of the ditch, where it put them in there. So it's not just on sand hills that you find them, it's wherever they've been moved, or possibly that Indian might have used that point to fish, to spear or something too. And also, like Kentucky and places like that, things that I've read about is people will go and rake the leaves on a hill slope and then come back after a major rain, and they'll uncover some different things there. So, there's all kinds of tricks of different things, once you have your property like that. Rock bars, raised areas on a creek. It may have gotten swept there, and then it just stayed there, and then the water flowed over it. Also, when you are hunting, if you find a particular piece, and I have an example here. My father, there's a celts right here in the middle, and over a 5-year period, he found 3 different pieces. So it's a possibility, if you find something, it's worth going back there and looking in that same area, because chances are it's probably there if somebody else hasn't picked it up on that. Other things, you might find if you find a lot of like triangular pieces in one area, that could have been a burial cache, what's considered a cache that has been uncovered and may have been part of what they were buried with, or maybe they just sat there and that was the only type of point that they made that time. The best time to look for artifacts is early spring or late fall. And why do you think that? Right. The crops the ground's just been worked up, and we could have had some early, the rain during the spring, and late fall, if people are still plowing, then it's uncovering it on that. And then, of course, after the heavy rains, that was our big thing. If we had a rain, it's like we were excited to go jump in the truck with Dad and head to the sandhills because you knew you were going to find something. And then also, before the crops get a foot tall, and nowadays we've got our beans are planted so close, but back in the day when I was hunting, you had the further distance of the rows. You just had to make sure as little kids that you stepped over. That was our biggest thing, is do not step on the crops. But I also have gone with my husband's sister, and the corn was up to here, and we were able to get to a certain area where there was like an eroded area, and of course it washed the seed of the corn out, so you had an open area and it was uncovered, so it wasn't too hard to get back there to that. So we looked there, and she found one like that was right there in the ditch area where it had washed it in. It just makes it easier when things are shorter, and you don't have to worry about it hitting your head, and there's a reason why it's to be, when I show you here in a minute, as to how far out you look. It makes it easier when they're shorter crops. And of course, after a field is plowed. How do you search for artifacts? Okay, this is my knowledge that I've had. I suggest that you walk in a grid pattern. So you walk this way and then you'll come back and forth. You look to see how the ground has been farmed, if it has been plowed and things have been plowed to the right. You don't want to really worry too much because it's probably covered up things on one side that it's been thrown over on, but uncovered on the other. So I look down and I scan 3 feet out this way. So I glance 3 feet, just kind of guesstimate out 3 feet in front and 3 foot to the side. So then I'll keep walking. And so now I do not have to look in front of me because I've already looked there. So then you just keep looking your 3 foot like an arch in front of you. So then when you get to a point where you want to turn around and come back, and you can walk if the crops are you can walk down the rows, but go over 6 foot because you've already searched 3 feet of that 6 feet. So when you go 6 foot over, then you're looking at 3 feet to your right or left that you haven't searched. And again, start by looking down, but if you walk like this all day long, you're not going to find things. But you just want to, that's called what I call scanning, or walking and gawking, whatever. And then you're looking for the out of place things, which is different types of rock. The color, the shape, the color of the dirt might indicate things. My dad come across some copper beads and the ground was green. So that distinguishes that, yeah, copper, because copper, turns green. Or sometimes if there was a cache or a burial thing that has been uncovered, you might find like a reddish, I think it's called ochre, is that right? It's like a chert or a finely ground orangey powder, and that they would have put in possibly the grave sites. Things like pottery, the notches, like you might have an arrowhead that has a notch out of it, but it's only a small part of it. But that kind of helps you to distinguish. And then make sure that you take something along. This was what my dad used, and I've got a cork on the end. But he rigged this up with one of his deer antlers that he had, and he'd walk like this, and he would uncover instead of bending over. So I suggest have a walking stick with you because you do spend a lot of time bending over. And then, of course, make sure you have something to put your treasures in that you find. And you want to be careful on that. Takes a couple, Kleenexes with you, because if you find a lot and you got them in your pocket and they're rubbing against each other, if you've got some nice points, you definitely do not want to chip them, because they will, chip easily. Experience of finding an arrowhead. So this is where I'd like for Tom and a couple, Alan, and then they're going to pass, it's like just a plastic tote that has sand in it. And I'd like for each one to pull one out, but I want you to anticipate thinking, wow, could be a whole one, because this is the hunt, this is what's fun. So I kind of wanted you to experience a little bit about that. And then just so you know, people that hunt Indian artifacts, you find more broken things than you do nice points. So keep that in mind if you find. And the arrowheads that are in there are ones that I found. They did not come out of my dad's collection. So I am gifting that to you. And then you can look at different examples as we're talking about what makes it an arrowhead.
So are the notches different? Do those indicate something different?
The notches on the arrowheads, yes. And over here, it shows you different points, and the number matches up with its name. And like there's some that look like a bottleneck on the back, and they're called bottlenecks. There's some that are called Kirkland. There's some that are called Clovis. There's, but this will give you a lot of the names, and you might later come up here and look at that diagram, and then that will show, give you an idea of what you did find. And if you want a little more knowledge or help, some of these gentlemen or myself can also help you with that. How do you know it's an artifact? So when you're looking for the worked edge and a polished edge or a notch, the round or oval with indications, indentions. It's possible there is an artifact identification on your phone, which there is. You can Google, because I did it today where I put an arrowhead on the table, and you can do Google and take a photo of it, and it will tell you the name of the point. It'll give you an idea of value, possibly, and more information on that. And then your last resort, ask yourself, does it look like something an Indian, or if you were an Indian back in the day, if you would have used it as a tool? Something like this, that's an odd thing. So to me, that could have been used as an Indian, as like a hoe, thing like that. It's not really, it's just odd, Next, the types of Indian artifacts. Okay, you got ground stone tools, which could be like your pestle, it's like a peck and a grind thing. So your axes, and this is my knowledge of what I was told. So there could be a variance as to a different reasoning as to what category they go in. But they start out with a big chunk, and then they use stones themselves to pound and break off different pieces. They use sand to grind and to smooth. Some of these axes are pretty darn smooth and shiny. And of course the sand, they might have rubbed them on other stones, to get that beveled point. Flake stone tools, drills, blades, scrapers, and I have a tray of scrapers up here to the middle. And one thing about scrapers, they may have been used to work with hides or whatever purpose, but those were the repurposed points. They may have been a full point that maybe broke, and they just rounded the edge off to make it into another type of tool rather than just pitch in it. So that's what's kind of unique about them, and that's why they're thicker at the notched area, because they originally were a longer point, and to be a longer point they got to be heavier up top. Flint knapping, refined flaking technique, and they used antler bone. And I'll give you an example. This is what I call a blank. They maybe went to a quarry site and they would chip out just something like this and then carry that around. They didn't carry huge chunks. And then when they got to their campsite, they might, then continue on doing it. But with your flint, and I'm just using this because it's bigger, but this is not like the nice flint, but you could use a stone, and you would have this like on maybe a leather piece on your leg, and you hit on the top and it flakes from underneath. And then when you get this one side done, you flip it over and you start this way. So that is what thins it out. And if you look on your arrowheads on the very edges, you'll see where you've got little grooves, like where it maybe was flaked off. So when you're out on the field and you find a piece of flint, that's the first thing you look at, because you look to see if it's been worked, and that just those little notches. So then we got the projectile points. Clovis, Folsom, Adena are your older points. Back in, guys, the Paleo period was your Clovis and your Folsom, and they are more of like a point like this, but on the back of it, they did not have the notches. They had like a flaked out area, and right offhand, I don't know if it was the Clovis that had like a bigger, just a flake out of the back, or if it was the Folsom, but those are your older ones. And how the Indians hook these up to the wood spears is they would use what's called like sinew, I think. What was it? Sinew. And that was intestines, or their
strips of leather.
strips, right, but very fine pieces. And then they probably used sap off of a tree or resin like that, and then they wrapped it around, and then that's how they fastened them to the different points. You've got pendants and decorative pieces, which there are what they call birdstones, fantastic pieces of artwork, and I think they find more of those down in southern Indiana, but they look like birds, so that's why they get the name of a birdstone. And that could have been used more as ceremonial, or like this guy's a chief or something. You might find different shells, the copper beads. They use fossilized plants, and I think we've probably all found they look like what they call Indian beads, but they were actually, it's just a fossilized plant stem that breaks apart. Pipes. You'll come across pipes out there, and you've got the French trade pipes, which I have a couple pieces, and that's usually just this fine white stuff. Shirley has a pipe here. I'm not sure if that is like an Indian pipe or if it's like a trade pipe, but I do know that my dad did find 2 stone, very nicely worked, polished pipes that did not have stems on them, because they used either reeds or something else for that, but the pipe itself was out of stone, where there were holes drilled in 2 different areas and then marks on it. But that is an exceptional find, to find something like that. Game stones, round sized stones. Shirley also has a stone over there that's quite smooth. This could have been a game stone, or the round ball. Somewhere where I was reading, this could have been a game ball. And it was more like with this, I think they call them cottle stones, but they could kind of like roll it and then practice their arrows, like say it was a rabbit, and shoot at this. I've read, that was a possibility. So it's not really, it's kind of like a game, but yet it's a learning experience on that. Pottery. The pottery, again, we have here, I have some other pot rims. Here I have boxes of pottery at home that is a tremendous jigsaw puzzle to try to put together, but my dad did attempt it, and we have part of it glued. But the pottery was made out of your clay mixed with sand and shell fragments that were crushed together. And certain time periods, you would find more of different ways that they started. And they may have just started with the clay rather than adding the thing to it. But prior to using pottery, they used maybe like the stomach bag of an animal or the hide, and they would heat the stones up and then put that in the water, and then that heated, because you couldn't put hides over the extreme heat. But once they designed the pottery, either for storage of things or to cook in, they, just like we would do with our pottery, we put it in a hot kiln. They used the hot ground and then covered it, and it like seasoned it, made it hard. Animal bone slivers, they used for either designs on things. I have some pieces of bone. They used the turkey spur. There's some bones in here that they may have used to go through the hide, or just a variety of different things. And then also you find non-Indian finds, coins. My dad had found some 1-cent pennies or 2-cent pennies. There's some different things through there. I used to enjoy finding the porcelain doll pieces, like the little white legs that had the little black shoe on it, or the hand. I have a little teacup thing, but those they show right up there on the dirt because they're white. You find teeth. It could be like from a deer or a fox or anything like that. I do have, my dad thought these were horse teeth, but when I look up like on the internet, I think they're bison teeth. So we have some of those here, but those were found on the sandhill. And once it's a dry spot for an Indian camp, it was also a good place for a homestead. So that's why you find horseshoes, you'll find all kinds of different things. And it's kind of fun just to hang on to those items also, because that's a part of history.
Did they have one person that created all of the points, or did each Indian have their own style and method?
I've done some reading on different things where there's on a certain an arrowhead that it just looked like they thought it was just they were left-handed, because they always had that twist in them type thing. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm sure different tribes had different points that they were famous for. I don't know that knowledge on that part of it, but it's like whatever they were going to use them for. But some points were not used for, they were just used for ceremonial things, like some big blades like this that are white, and they're huge. Well, those, they may not have used them for anything. This could have been like a knife. They usually use the smaller things. George Johnson talks a lot about what some of the artifacts were from. He was a gentleman, I believe has passed, that lived over by Moody Road, and his family does a lot, had a farm ground there, and he's got lots of stories and lots of knowledge, because he takes it one step further to talk about what these arrowheads were used for. So I find that book just a very easy read, and different ideas. It gives you a whole different outlook on things. Again, this is the variety of points. So what you have, you might see up here, these are your older ones, and see how that groove is here in the center. Then you've got, I believe this is a bifurcate, and it has that Y in the back and the 5 points. You've got your triangles are on the far period. So this is kind of going, I think, as the age of them. You've got Kirklands, you've got bottlenecks, and a bottleneck it looks just like a bottleneck. And you've got Snyder points that are more, they're rounded out like this and come in, and those are really nice points. But that's a variety of what you see when you're out there hunting. We talked about the scrapers, and there's the tray of those, and these are more like this. Did anybody pull one of those out tonight? I think I had a couple of them in. Did you find your scraper? Yeah. These are drills and awls, and I always thought that the drill was strictly used for making holes in leather, but I kind of read some things the other day that no, they used that to drill holes in working on some of the stone too. And they would have had this maybe hooked to something to give them more of a handle rather than just twisting it with your hands, but working it back and forth. Okay, and this is where some other examples of the pottery that they used for their cooking pots. And again, made out of the sand and the shell fragments. They were fired to harden them, and just different designs. Axes. Okay, we have axes here in the middle. Axes range from small, everybody calls them tomahawks and thinks of scalping. I think most of them were used for splitting bark off of trees, because our woodland Indians, they had not so much teepees, they had the bark houses. You had the long houses that were just slices of bark. They may have used them for the dugout canoes that now they are starting to find. Anybody see that recently? They're starting to find dugout canoes buried, or they're not buried, but they're just submerged underwater. And I did some reading where that's how they preserved them in the winter. They'd sink them, put rocks on top, and then come spring, they'd bring them back up, and that preserved the wood on them. But the axes we see here, this is like some sinew or the string tied around them, and you've got a full groove, which is kind of hard to see, on both sides of the rock, or you have a 3/4, so just on one side. And I'm thinking the 3/4, guys, is that the older of the axes? No, it's the other way around? Okay, so that kind of shows you some examples and how they chipped them out. They started with a chunk here, and then they use a rock in their hand and kind of shape, and then they finally do the grinding and the rubbing to smooth them out. I don't know, can you see this one over here? This is a pestle, so they may have used that as grinding. I have one here. I think Shirley has one over there where it's flat on the bottom, so that it's, grinding this way. They could have hit it, on the sides. You've got the round balls. We have nut stones, and those are over here. And they have a divot in them. So they put the nut on there, and then they'd use another stone and crack it, or did kind of like a mortar, pestle and mortar. But this, it's called a nut stone. So you see a lot of those, and there's like a little divot on both sides. Or stones that are flat, that don't have any of the divots. That's an unusual. If you found that out there, anything round is an unusual stone, I think. But if it's flat on a side, that even makes it better, because that's either ground like this or they've hit. Another piece, this is where of slate, I would say, that has the hole drilled in it. It's not all the way through, but we don't know if it was the beginning of the banner stone, but it's smooth. So now whether they used the drill, you know, like I was talking about, a bigger one to do that, or if they just worked sand and some type of another or bone, like an antler or something like that, and worked that smooth. Our celts. Our celts are shaped like this, and they come kind of more to a point, and they're really smooth through here. Now, exactly what they used them, they could have used them for digging. I have a few of them over here, or they could have attached those kind of like you know, like we call it a splitter, like where you split wood. They may have used it to start like the stripping of the bark. But there you'll find some unique ones like that. Over to the right, banner stones, and this is what the conflict is of what they were actually used for. And Shirley has one or two there. I have 3 that I found, and the shapes are all different, but there's a hole all the way through. You see that? Each side is similar, whether it was used as a counterweight on the Adelaide thing, or whether it was used on a stick for a chief to distinguish that he was an important person. That all varies, but that's usually out of a really smooth rock. And I have a piece which you can look at later, is up here in the top corner, and I picked it up and it is smooth. And I kept looking at it, and my dad's like, "Do you find something?" And like, "I think I found a piece of plate." And it isn't. It is an actual stone, and I've had somebody tell me that it's stone from Wisconsin. So that tells you how far that has traveled, and that was just found in Fair Oaks several years ago, but it's not your normal stone. So that is out there because all these tribes congregated and got pushed to this area. So you find more than just your normal things. Displaying your artifacts. This is some ways to display. Shirley has a different way. The gentlemen have a different way. Most people, some of them will make designs and hang them on the wall, but you have to put then glue so they don't slide down. And I found that if you use tape or glue, you cannot get that stuff off, later. But it is a very unique way to make. Some people will make like an Indian chief, and they'll use the arrowheads. A lot of people use red and green. When you go to archaeology shows, they'll use red or green behind. Now, whether that just makes that arrowhead stand out more than a brown piece or a white piece of material, but that's some of the reasoning. My dad used to have these, they were coffee tables that had a glass top that you could lift up, but an indentation like about this far. He'd lay them all out on there and then put the glass top on it. It kept them in one spot, and you could put another tray on top. But those are different ideas. Is anybody else, have they displayed any different ways? Okay, so your frames work well, small boxes. My dad had his all in cigar boxes. We had cigar box, cigar box, cigar box, and he'd put his broken points in one, tips in the other, and things like that. You just have to remember that if you are what I call rifling through or rummaging through, that stone against stone, you can easily chip things. So if you've got some nice points, it's better to have them in a tray than going through them, because it will chip them. The value of artifacts, it depends on the age, the design, the rarity. That distinguishes the artifact's value. Also a factor is how bad does someone want it in their collection. Buyers will pay more sometimes for just a few pieces than for the whole collection that you have. And if selling artifacts, please beware, as there are buyers out there just waiting to take advantage of the sellers, because there's I myself don't even know the value on a lot of this stuff, and I know it's up and it's down, and but that's where you kind of do your research before you actually sell it to somebody. And if purchasing it, you definitely want to make sure that you know it's authentic, because we have a lot of crafty people out there that have learned to design fantastic points. And how they know that they're authentic, something that I was seeing or reading showed them actually looking under microscopes and things like that, that actually tells the age of the stone and if it's newer, flaking, or old, you know, that type of thing. And I believe you can get a paper for authenticity on that. Whether you have to pay to have that done, I would assume yes, but I know with my dad's collection, everything's authentic because he didn't do any of that or didn't buy anything. But yeah, you've got a lot of people that are passing it off as authentic things. They're very, very crafty. I mean, some of these pieces are so elaborate, but there are elaborate arrowheads out there also. Where do you find this knowledge? Internet, a big wealth of knowledge there. One particular thing is projectilepoints.net. It kind of gives you maybe an age period, the type of point, possibly some value to it. Collectors, from the gentleman out here, have knowledge on that. I have the knowledge of what I grew up with. Museums, you got the Chicago, the Indianapolis museums, different places like that it's out there. The Department of Natural Resources, the Division of the Historic Preservation and Archaeology is in Indianapolis. That's where these papers, the white ones on the end, came from, something that they printed out, and I just made it a little bit bigger for everybody's knowledge on that. Indian artifact shows. I used to go to Indian artifact shows with my dad. Sometimes he would set up a display. They have like competitions for like best of the show, you know, for your display, or the best find for that spring or that fall. And then they were awarded, you know, different things. But some of those that I went to were in Illinois. Valparaiso at the university had one. Coming up here that I just learned from a gentleman that's hunts for them and is like a vice president, I believe, in an archaeology group at Peru, Indiana. Their fairgrounds in April, the second Saturday in April, they will have an artifact show there. It's free to go through, but you get to see the variety of things, and that would be probably from all over Indiana, possibly that comes there. It's kind of, I think it's kind of neat to do that. It reminds me of going through an antique store. You see what is considered an antique. So when you walk through these different places, you see what are artifacts. So you might not even be thinking that's an artifact when you're out, you know, looking on a hill, but once you see it displayed somewhere, then it's in your mind then that's something new that, you know, keep an eye looking for. Books and articles, again, this George Johnson is a good one. That was just given to my dad on that. At one time I thought we may have had something at the Historical Society that he, but that's a really very easy to read, nice, knowledgeable book. I went to the library to see what I could find there. You don't find a lot on what you or I wanted to look at. It's just very, very simple things on Indians. The gentleman back here has several books, so you probably have to buy those online or things like that. And it definitely, it's kind of like your coin books. You know, it shows you what's out there. That's probably what those are also. We have to be responsible when we're collecting and looking for these. So we always have to have the landowner's permission. You don't dig for artifacts, only collect surface finds. Excavation, the digging part, requires contacting the Division of Historic Prevention and Archaeology, Preservation and Archaeology. And then any discovery of any human remains, if you have that question that it could be human, you have to leave it undisturbed and contact that division of the historic preservation and or a DNR officer, because you have to go through a whole different process of once you start digging on that part. My conclusion, I have mixed emotions regarding this hobby. I find the Indian culture fascinating, as they worked hard, they were not lazy, and they respected what the earth and Mother Nature and their gods provided for them. They lived a simple life, trying very hard to survive a changing world. And archaeologists over the years have been piecing together their cultures by studying their relics. Some people go to the extreme of noting where they found this point and that to help with the studying of that. And I know that there is different, like on our phones, we got the GPS. You can actually make notes that you found this at this spot or this spot, and then keep a record. And there's somebody out there that might be interested in that information to further on the knowledge of the history itself. You know, maybe you found some particular stone that was part of a burial. Well, then they would know that, you know, their chiefs might, if they start seeing those in other burials or something like that, they would know that that was an item that they felt was important to put in there. The bad part is it's so sad that we've to think about their demise as we learn more about how we were so cruel and shoved them from one place to the other. In today's world, it's just sad that we've done that to a whole, the native culture on that part of it. So it's kind of like, it's not kind of like, but I was a zookeeper at one time, and I struggled with having animals in cages, but yet for educational purposes. So it's kind of that, you know, that both ways like that. But I hope everybody takes some of this knowledge home and answers some of their questions on different things, and I hope this has been beneficial. But I definitely thank the Historical Society for letting me do this. This is my first presentation, and it's kind of like a tribute to my dad that had all this and never really, he did a few presentations and went to some of the schools. I think he went to South Newton one year and did little presentations, but I felt this audience was the right audience to present this to. So thank you very much, and again I thank my husband and the guys for passing the things around, and it's been enjoyable, so thanks.